Hey guys, happy Monday and welcome back from Christmas break. It is January 4th, 2021. Make sure you fill out the attendance link so we can give you credit for being here. Checklist items are super simple. Your vocab for multicellular organisms is due on Friday the 15th. That also means you'll have an assessment that day, and that's actually going to be the day you take your cell test. You also need to make sure you finish the notes that I'm about to go over and turn them in, because that's what we did today in class, was take notes. So under the classwork tab, you can find your copy. Your fill-in-the-blank notes are titled multicellular notes, and they are under the classwork tab in Google Classroom. Remember that the blanks will always be the highlighted words in the presentation. So this is your set of notes on multicellular organisms. So what exactly is a multicellular organism? It's an organism that consists of more than one cell. This is not like our protists that were only made up of one single cell. These are organisms that have more than one cell. So like us, we're made up of billions of cells. Each cell inside of a multicellular organism has organelles in it, which are these tiny structures that have a job to do within the cell. It helps it function and stay alive. So let's first talk about the word eukaryote and prokaryote, okay? Multicellular organisms like animals and plants like us, right? We have cells that have a nucleus, which makes us eukaryotes. So if an organism has a nucleus, it's considered a eukaryote. If an organism does not have a nucleus, like bacteria, they're considered prokaryotes. The best way to remember it is pro rhymes with no, and prokaryotes have no nucleus, all right? So what are these organelles we're talking about that you can find inside of cells? Well, organelles are defined as tiny structures that carry out a specific job. So for us as humans, we have organs, and our organs each do something vital in keeping us alive. Same thing for organelles in a cell. These tiny little parts of the cell have a specific job to keep the cell alive and moving, right? So examples would be a nucleus, which tells the cell what to do. The mitochondria, which provides power for the cell. The Golgi body, which receives, packages up, and sends out the protein that the cell needs. So each specific organelle within the cell has a job to do. So when we talk about multicellular organisms, we will typically talk about plant or animal cells. There's a key difference in the two just based off of the size and shape of them. So plant cells are going to be more square shaped and have more jagged ridges. So you can see in this picture here, you have like sharp edges wherever a new side of the cell starts. That's because they have an organelle called a cell wall. And the job of the cell wall is to protect the cell and give it structure to make it strong. And because the plant cell has a cell wall, it makes it more rigid. Animal cells don't have a cell wall. They just have a flexible cell membrane. So instead of having sharp edges, your animal cells are more circular and round. There are, believe it or not, a lot of similarities between animal and plant cells. You can see in this table here, there's a list of about 12 different organelles that you can find in both plant and animal cells. So even though plants and animals are so different, the cells inside of them actually have a lot of the same organelles that have the same job within the cell. So let's talk about these organelles that both plant and animal cells have. The first is a cell membrane. Your cell membrane's job is to control what goes in and what goes out of the cell. Okay, if anything's going in and out of the cell, it has to pass through the cell membrane. It lets the good things in and keeps the harmful things out. And I like to compare it to like a security guard, right? Keeps the good things in at the concert or wherever you're going, and then keeps the bad things out, the ones that aren't welcome. The cytoplasm is also found in both animal and plant cells. We talked about this term when we went over the amoeba because it moves with cytoplasmic streaming, and what that meant was that the gel or the gooey stuff inside the cell kind of flowed around. That stuff was called cytoplasm. So cytoplasm is defined as a gel-like region, so all of this clear gooey stuff, it's a gel-like region between the cell membrane, which is your outer part, and then what it does is it has nutrients in it floating around in it. It has water, and its main job is to hold those organelles in place. And I'm comparing that to Jell-O, because Jell-O is kind of gel-like, and if you have the Jell-O, especially with the fruit in it, it holds those fruit pieces in place. Next is the cytoskeleton, and the cytoskeleton is made up of what we call microtubules, which are structures that are just made up of really strong proteins. Their job is to give structure to the cell, okay, so to help make it strong. Next is a nucleus, which we talked about with our protists. It's the brain of the cell, right? That's what we compare it to, because it controls all of the functions within the cell, and it directs all the cell's activities, just like the brain does for a human. Inside of the nucleus, there are random parts to it. So the outermost barrier here is called a nuclear membrane. A membrane is just like an outer coating, right? So a nuclear membrane, it separates the inside of the nucleus from the cytoplasm that's around the cell, okay? And inside of the nucleus, you can find chromatin, which are little strands that float around, and they actually contain genetic material. So that's where the DNA is found. All the DNA is found inside the nucleus. And then inside the nucleus is a little ball, a little sphere that you see here, and that's called a nucleolus. And the nucleolus has a very important job of producing ribosomes. And ribosomes are very important inside of cells because they make protein. The mitochondria is also found in both plant and animal cells, and its main job is to produce energy for the cell. So they look like these little oval rod shapes, kind of have like zigzags in them. And we refer to it as the powerhouse of the cell, because it has energy that's converted into power for the cell to use. So a good way to remember it is the mighty mitochondria. Something that's mighty is something that's strong and powerful. So think of your mitochondria as the powerhouse of your cell. The next organelle is the endoplasmic reticulum. We abbreviate this with ER just because that's a really long word, or two words. So the ER is just a maze of passageways. So see how it just looks like little tunnels, little passageways? And its main job is to carry proteins in the cell, okay? So it carries those proteins and it transports nutrients. So the endoplasmic reticulum is a big, like, highway. It transports things. There's two different types of ER. You can have smooth ER, like you see here, that doesn't have any of those little dots on it. And then you see rough ER, and the rough ER has the little dots on it, and those dots are ribosomes, which make our proteins. So smooth ER is smooth because it doesn't have any ribosomes on it, and rough ER is rough because it carries those ribosome structures on the outside of it. Golgi bodies are flattened sacs or tubes. They kind of look like squished rubber bands. And what they do is they get the protein that the ER is transporting. It packages the protein up and sends it out to the cell so that the cell can use the protein. So when I think of Golgi bodies, I think of like a mail room. So think of Gmail. G for Golgi bodies, and mail because it's like a mail room. You know, the post office gets the packages, puts the correct postage on it, and sends it out to where it needs to go. Ribosomes can be found in both plant and animal cells as well, and they are small little organelles that float around in the cytoplasm, so in the gel, but they also attach to the ER. Remember how we just talked about the rough ER? That's where those ribosomes go. And they are considered factories inside of the cell because they are producing the protein that your cell needs. A good way to remember it is rib. When you eat ribs or any type of meat, it gives you protein. So remember that first word right there, rib, and know that ribs give you protein, and ribosomes make the protein within the cell. Next, we have vacuoles, and those are just big storage areas inside of plant and animal cells. The only difference is that in a plant cell, the vacuole is much larger, and then in an animal cell, the storage area is smaller. But both cells have them. And I'm comparing that to a refrigerator because your refrigerator stores stuff for you too. Now let's talk about the organelles that can only be found in plant cells. So there are two that you can only find in plant cells. They're not in animal cells. And that's your chloroplast right here and then your outer barrier right here, the green cell wall. The cell walls function, remember when we talked about the structure and the shape of a plant cell, we talked about how it has a cell wall, and it's this rigid layer of material on the outermost side of the cell. It's used to protect and support the cell as well as help give it structure. I'm comparing that to like the wires outside of a prison, right? Because that is trying to protect the community from the criminals. Next, we have a chloroplast, and chloroplasts are only in plant cells because your plant cells undergo photosynthesis. So they need that sunlight to turn into energy, and it's the chloroplast that does that captures the sunlight and then creates it food for the plant cell to have. And I'm comparing that to solar panels here because solar panels use sunlight to make energy. Now, there are certain organelles that are only found in animal cells, and those two are lysosomes and centrioles. Lysosomes are considered the cell's cleanup crew. They're round structures that break down materials inside of the cell. So we consider it the cell's cleanup crew because it cleans up and breaks down materials for the cell. Sometimes lysosomes show up in plant cells, but they are much more frequent in animal cells. So we are sticking to lysosomes found mostly in animal cells. And I'm comparing it to like a janitor or something that cleans. The best way to remember it is the first part. If you put an L in there, it spells Lysol. And Lysol is a cleaning thing that we use to get rid of bacteria and germs. And lysosomes kind of do the same thing. They clean up the cell. Next, we have centrioles, and they are only in animal cells, and they provide support with cell division. What they do is they essentially help the cell multiply and make more, right? So they help with reproduction. Plant cells are more organized in their structure, and they're more compact, so they don't need centrioles. And I'm comparing that to your math teacher because math teachers can help you multiply and divide. It's cheesy, I know, but it works. All right, so now let's compare plant and animal cells to a bacterial cell. We know that bacteria is a single-celled organism. So let's look at the differences here. Bacteria cells are going to be smaller than plant and animal cells. And they don't have a nucleus, so this makes it a prokaryote because it has no nucleus, all right? Now, when we talked about the nucleus, we talked about how DNA was found in the nucleus for plant and animal cells. Well, if you're a bacteria cell and you don't have a nucleus, the DNA just floats around in the cytoplasm because it doesn't have a nucleus to contain it. So what exactly are specialized cells? Specialized cells are cells with a specific function, okay? So they work together to create tissue and organs. You can have a bone cell, a muscle cell, a nervous cell. All of these different cells have a specialized function inside of the body. The last part of your notes is you looking at the structure here and you labeling the different parts of the cell. If you look everywhere where there's a number, there's a key down here that shows you what organelle is at that location of the cell. So just make sure you look at this picture and then add in the different organelles to your notes. And that is all. If you have any questions, please reach out to your teacher and we will be more than happy to help you.